Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. The two sponsors are Eco Engineers and Philip Lee LLP. Oh, Eco Engineers. What isn't Eco Engineers? I've had a really great vantage point of carbon dioxide removal. And so often I'll start talking with a company and they will say something like, oh, well, we've been working with Eco Engineers for a while now, either trying to build this methodology or just trying to figure this project out, trying to get the quantification right, trying to figure this MRV out. That has happened to me so many times. And I've been glad to see them have so much success with so many companies in our space. Eco Engineers is essentially a consultancy that helps carbon removal tech and project developers get to market effectively. If you've ever started a company, one of the early decisions that you're going to need to make is which of these things can we bring in-house and which of these things do we need to pay consultants for? And often the conventional knowledge here is that it always makes sense to bring stuff in-house if you can. But I think bringing in very experienced consultants early on can save projects a lot of time and money. For instance, you might end up on the phone with David LaGreca. David's going to be on the podcast soon, and David has done, dozens of methodologies within the voluntary carbon market. And if you could just get on the phone with David for a little bit and you are trying to bring a new methodology or protocol to market, you have some new approach, you're a biochar project and you're trying to figure out, given your technology, region, biomass availability, what is the best way for me to work within the options that I have available to me? That's a person that you could very easily be paired with. David will likely shave off time and money from what would otherwise be a process that is pretty overwhelming. And that's just the start of it too. Eco has been engaged with people I've known or worked with, from everything from project design to the actual MRV plans, doing the LCA itself, registering the project, doing the diligence support, feasibility studies, tech evaluations, market eligibility. I feel like they're halfway to being an EPC without actually being an EPC for some of these things. Sometimes you don't necessarily need one person full-time thinking only about your project. Sometimes it makes sense to get 10 people on a fractional basis who have worked on collectively hundreds or maybe thousands of projects. Whether or not that will be the way for your company to go, you'll have to take the calls to figure it out. And I very much think you should do that. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to get in touch with Eco Engineers. Tell them Ross Kenyon sent you. Philip Lee LLP is a law firm with a lot of experience in carbon markets and carbon removal. If you've been working in this space for really any amount of time, you probably have noticed that you do need competent counsel to do business here. The contracts that get signed are frankly pretty weird. You're going to need help from a lawyer with a red pen. I'm sorry to inform you, your only choice is basically who they should be. And if you are deciding who they should be, you should be considering Philip Lee LLP. They've won Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year for the last, since 2023, essentially. It hasn't happened yet for 2026. I imagine they're a contender for it this year as well. They are the largest legal team dedicated to the financing and development of carbon projects globally, and they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. One cool new thing I just learned, actually, is that they have been listed as a firm in Chambers Global as a global market leader in the area of climate change. This listing aligns Philip Lee LLP with around 15 to 20 of the leading law firms practicing in this practice area in the entire world. So congrats to Philip Lee LLP. Thank you to Philip Lee LLP for your generous support of the show. You make it possible for me to dedicate so much time to putting out content that I hope is useful to our friends and peers and fellow travelers in the world of carbon removal, climate change, and carbon markets. Thanks so much. Here's the show. Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. I've been working in climate for about a decade and running this podcast basically the entire way through. If you go back and listen to some of the early episodes, it's me learning in public, and I guess I've never really stopped doing that. If you're new here, welcome. Much of the show is about carbon dioxide removal, but it really is about a lot in climate. And also, climate touches so many issues from the humanities, about what it means to be a human, where our species is going, what is happening in general with our status as beings on this planet. and all of the connections to history, philosophy, literature, film, theology, so much else. If this is not your first time listening, you know what I'm about to do, right? I would love it if you could please open up your podcast app. Give this show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe so you can get the podcasts regularly delivered to your phone. There's a Substack for this publication, the link to which is in the show notes if you'd like to subscribe on Substack. I'm actually trying to move a lot of stuff over to Substack. And I actually just launched a new podcast over there too. It's different from this one. Reversing Climate Change are interview shows and monologue shows. This other show is on the old Carbon Removal Newsroom feed, which has been inactive for a couple of years, but I hung on to it knowing at some point I'd like to repurpose it. There's still a lot of people subscribed to it who are passionate carbon removal people. So I built a new show on top of it called Climate Workers Anonymous. I've been describing it as a form of post-secret for climate. If you are in your 30s, if you are a millennial of some type and you grew up in the United States, you probably know about post-secret. People would decorate a postcard, write on it a sentiment that they felt uncomfortable sharing themselves, and mail it in anonymously to be published. And I wanted Climate Workers Anonymous to be a space where people can share some of their true feelings about the difficulties of working in climate, about caring about this, and daring to believe in a time when climate is not the world's primary focus. When the world is looking elsewhere and things are difficult. And even when things are not difficult, I wanted to have a space where people could share things that I felt naive, optimistic, evolutionary. What could our species become? What if we were a kinder species? What if we were able to solve some of the persistent, deep, fundamental problems of being a human? Or also, what if we just need to stare into that void a little bit and sit with it? That's totally fine too. I'm not trying to find a right answer. I am trying to make space for people to express their feelings, to feel their feelings, and to connect with others who want space to do so in a way that's not going to negatively impact their careers. I'm sure you've noticed that if you post optimistic things on LinkedIn, they do fairly well. Whenever I post something that is critical or a bit negative or anything that leads the algorithm to think that there's some sort of theological content in it at all, the algorithm is frowning so deeply at me. LinkedIn is one of those places that feels very boosterish. That's what it's for, you know? The tool is the message, as some people say. And it's not my job to get mad at the tool for not doing what it was designed to do, but that's at least partially why I am moving some things over to Substack. So if you'd like to follow along with Climate Workers Anonymous, if you want to submit an anonymous feeling, idea, sentiment, story for me to read on your behalf for Climate Workers Anonymous, you can submit that over on Substack. I'll put the direct link in which to do that into the show notes here. And if you're willing to become a paid subscriber of the show, if you love this, if you keep coming back and listening, if you're willing to chip in a couple bucks a month, I would be so grateful. I'm asking you directly, will you please become a supporter of the show and pay a couple bucks a month to make sure this can keep going? It's a lot of work. I love it. I do it for its own sake, but some days you wake up and you're just like, what if I just didn't? But no, the show must go on. If you are a listener, if you love what's happening here, if you think you can spare the money, please become a paid subscriber. If you can't, I appreciate you anyways. You are no lesser in my sight for just being an appreciative listener, and that's wonderful as well. Today's show is with Tom Mills. Tom does a great job explaining his background, so I don't need to spend a lot of time doing it here. Otherwise, you're going to hear a lot of the same stuff when Tom starts explaining it. But Tom's had a very fascinating career working around the world in mining and agriculture. He was a Stripe Climate Fellow, which was a very prestigious program that collected a sort of who's who of carbon dioxide removal, working to figure out how to advance the industry. And his year-long project was trying to figure out how to embed carbon dioxide removal into agricultural supply chains. Sounds easy. Everyone points to it. Everyone wants to do it. Tom's the guy with the receipts. Tom's the person who he alleges that there are people who have studied this more than him. I would like to meet them because I have a hard time believing it almost. I really enjoyed speaking with Tom. He's now at Massey Carbon, which was the X Prize Grand Prize winner for carbon dioxide removal, and they're doing enhanced rock weathering in the Global South. we actually don't talk much about that. If you want more info on Mati, I had their CEO, Shantanu Agarwal, on several months ago, or maybe it's more like a year ago at this point, and I'll put the link in the show notes to that. In any case, thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll subscribe to Reversing Climate Change, and especially Climate Workers Anonymous on Substack. Thank you for listening. So honored that you would spend time hanging out with me, my friends, my colleagues, my peers. Thank you for doing this. Here is your show. Here is Tom Mills. Tom, how many times have we tried to do this? And then last time you deliberately staged a power outage to get out of my hard questioning, just like nailing you. Why won't you answer my vicious questions on your career, on Mati? Why do you do this?
Ross, I'm sorry. I think this is our fourth attempt, isn't it? So I'm sorry. And yeah, you're right. The wind was blowing last time, and we couldn't do it.
You're like, I think 20 or 30 minutes in, and then it just poof. I'm like, what now?
No. Although, so we're in quite a rural part of the UK, and the wind blows too hard, the trees do fall on the line. So it is like, yeah, a couple of times a year. But it was incredibly unfortunate that we were mid-flow.
Mid-flow.
When
you know what my first instinct was when you said that? I wanted to do, and did those feet in ancient times, which I only know because Eric Idle just starts singing it in a Flying Circus episode that I saw as a child. I'm like, what is this super British hymn thing that's happening right now? But that's like me transmitting some Anglophilia across the podcast to you.
No, we had it at our wedding. And do you know why? Because there's this line in it that says, about England's green and pleasant land, amongst those dark satanic mills. So it's, during the Industrial Revolution, and my name is Mills. And, hopefully I'm not that dark. I'm quite dark, but I'm not that satanic. But anyway, we thought it was quite a nice reference, and then we had to talk about it during the speech and stuff. But so we had it at our wedding. So it has a place in my heart, that hymn.
Is that that line is that Wordsworth? What is it? It's obviously a romantic poet of some stripe, but I can't. All right, looking it up right now. What's the like? Not that I listen to this really, but that's the Joe Rogan assistant. It's like, Jamie, go look that up. Okay, dark satanic mills. Look that up. Look that up for us right now. And did those feet in ancient? That's William Blake. Okay, William Blake is good too. Okay. So
that's great. It's a banger. It's an absolute
banger. I like that song. It's a beautiful one. But what's the connection? So wait, the dark satanic mills. Skip that part because you're ideally not dark or satanic. Yeah. What's the beautiful part that you?
No, it's just a beauty. Like when you are all together with your closest friends and everyone's singing it at the top of their voices. It's just incredibly magical and powerful, that song. And it has there's a power to it as a community that's pretty wonderful. So yeah, it reminds me of my wedding. So thank you for raising it.
Yeah, you did not expect it to go this direction. Neither did I. That's improv, baby. That's how it goes. I love that. I feel like that's such a nice version of national connection because it is some type of national British like hymn, right? It's something that's like just universally known.
I think it could have been. So it could have been the UK, and we are really off topic at the moment. But there are three. So UK's national anthem is obviously God Save the Queen, or the King now. Not the greatest sing-along in the world. And then we have I Vow to Thee, My Country, a better sing-along. And then I would argue the best is Jerusalem by Blake. So, and they sort of are slightly, at sort of international events you can...
But not Rule Britannia? You're not going to... That's not in there? I feel like that kind of went out of fashion.
Yeah, it's not in there for me, unfortunately.
Not enough for you in fashion? I don't know. I think it's a fine place to start. The thing with improv is sometimes I've seen a lot of improv in Chicago and Los Angeles and comedy, and sometimes you'll see the most well-regarded troupe and they will have an off night and you're like, that's worse than the amateurs that I've seen. And some nights amateurs will capture lightning in a bottle and it will be like the most sublime piece of art I've ever seen. And like, how did you possibly tie all these things together? This is truly incredible. So I always try to make room for a little bit of magic here. Whether or not we achieve it is a separate question, Tom. But okay, so some part of this is like there's a nice part of Englishness here in you. There's like a nice connection to national community, and there's also a connection to romantic thought and poetry, which I'm not sure how deep you are into personally. But when I think of those things, I do think of them as very much connected to agricultural supply chains, although no romantic writer would ever say supply chains. That's not a romantic phrase. They would say something else. But you have that sort of bucolic connection to the land is something that you're pointing to, I think. Am I reaching? You tell me.
No, I don't think you are. I think everything that's described in that Blake hymn around the rural idyll, around use of the land, around, there is some wonderful, you can draw in some wonderful connections here. The fact, I think where we're maybe stretching it a bit is my work is pretty global south focused, and we are taking, so we're transporting that hymn from this sort of bucolic pastures of these rolling English hills that we have outside into these amazing tropical landscapes where these pretzels are. So agriculture, yes. Romantic, yes. Location, maybe. But I think for me, back in the UK now, but most of my career has been living and working in those rural communities in Africa and to a large extent in South Asia as well. So where there is obviously an English stamp in some of those countries, and there are some interesting parallels. I did a lot of work in my first half of my career was really working in the governance of the mining industry. And I think there are some interesting parallels and interesting learnings actually between those two industries around carbon removal and mining. They both have a global marketplace. You both have physical, you're looking at very physical things that's linked to the place, right? You are linked to the geography, the climate, the rock. You have a lot of government engagement because you're trying to export something. So there are some interesting parallels there. And also learnings around how you ensure that benefits are shared. And I think for me, looking at what's gone really wrong in the past in some of those mining examples and what's gone right has been, I think, could be useful learnings that we can take into this industry going forward.
You might be the most employable person I've spoken with. You somehow have deep mining experience and deep agricultural experience simultaneously. I feel like that is not that big of a crossover territory. But
you know what? I became really fascinated by both of these things are incredibly physical. I came out of university in 2008 where the big thing was around technology, it was around computers, and I wanted to do something very physical. So that's the reason I went into it. And I just found it, just all of those ingredients, geopolitics, logistics, heavy engineering, all those things that we have in the CDR world. I absolutely love it. And that's why I think, CDR is a pretty exciting place to be working as well, because it shares all of those challenges.
Without a doubt. It's hard. The combination of those things you're expected to be halfway competent at are large. So wait, are you saying that you came out of school did you do software, or are you saying that you chose a degree that was contrary to the...
I think a lot of my peers were going, the super smart people were going into finance or going into early stage software startups or SaaS startups at the time. And the not cool kids were going into heavy industry and into mining or these other industries. So that's where, and I thought, that's where I'm not quite cool enough to, or I want to go and do something very physical as opposed to looking on the SaaS side of things.
Did you read Ernest Scheider's book, The War Below? Did you read that book about mining? He's been on the podcast before. He's a Reuters reporter, and he works on mining and things adjacent to mining. But he was saying that there's basically, pardon me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but there's a huge shortage of people who want to work in mining. A lot of young people don't even realize that it's a field that's going to be really important. Everyone knows now that we need way more copper and things like that, but the amount of time it takes to train people and then advance them through seniority to be able to fill all the roles that will need to be filled is going to take a long time. And I think everyone got so focused on the quick wins of software and software eating the world, as Mark Andreessen once wrote. Now what? Is physicality returning? Is it more important than maybe we've once thought it was, or what happened? Why did we lose sense of the physical world?
I think it's a really good question. I think that point you make around trying to convince people to go into these industries, like trying to go into mining, where we know that there is a massive reliance on critical minerals. I did my master's research in the area called the Kivus in the DRC, which is the where 3Ts are. Tin, tungsten. This is where a lot of these critical minerals come from. I'm really understanding that politics around it, and this is incredibly complicated. You need geologists, engineers, social scientists, political scientists. There's like this whole raft of skills, but the industry, because it had a massive amount of challenges, and has been extractive. A lot of the profits have been taken out of a number of countries and then exploited. That there is obviously there are a massive amount of challenges that the industry has faced, and I can see why less people are interested by going into it. But yeah,
it does have a feel of maybe you have to explain yourself to a lot of people for going into that field. Where I don't know, if you go into software, I feel like you are. Maybe that's changing with AI now. You are less likely to face critical comments. I imagine if you work in oil and gas or in mining or even in agribusiness, you probably get questions on Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holidays that you attend with your family. Of half of the family is just like, why would you ever want to support these companies and do this kind of work? And I can imagine that probably culturally dissuades people from a career like that, or they know that they have to answer for themselves, even though of course everyone depends upon mining with basically everything that we do, and depend upon agribusiness with so very much that we do, and same with oil and gas. But I imagine you get uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, and also I think that there's this interesting piece here around a number of those industries will determine the climate, and they're the delta between the amount of emissions that you're having within to extract that mineral or within that land use change in agriculture. These are where you could really make the big gains, the Pareto gains are in these industries as well. So, and I think when I was doing some work, and I've done quite a lot of work in scenario planning in my career, it's forecasting the future and trying to understand where, which I loved. It was great.
I bet you were good at it. Yeah, that's cool.
It was really fun. Anyway, but as part of that work, thinking through, well, where is going to be the highest leverage points to for interventions to do with the climate, and a lot of those industries, they are obviously very high leverage points to change.
When you are approaching these high leverage points, did that lead you to go into the Stripe Climate Fellows program with a focus on agricultural supply chains? Is that the next big lever to pull, or is that just the next big lever for you personally to pull with your experience? How do you conceptualize that?
So I spent the first bit of my career working in the mining sector in India, in Africa, and then I moved over to working in industry, and then I moved over to working as an advisor within ministries of mines and energy in Africa, but also extensively in South Asia. And when I decided I want to set up a small business, it was around the time that China looked as if it was going to invade Taiwan, and India became this real hotspot of interest, because when people were looking to diversify their supply chains, they were looking at India as the key area. We saw this with Foxconn, with Apple, and so my clients at the time were asking me to go work out in India. So that was the sort of, having done quite a bit of work in this region, we then moved out to India. And while I was doing that work, I was writing quite a lot, writing a bit academically, writing on the energy sector, and also doing the scenarios work. And it became very clear that in India there was obviously a massive problem, but we also had this big opportunity as well from this area of carbon removal. I stumbled across it when I was writing these academic papers, and I was like, this sounds incredibly optimistic. This is really exciting. This is a solution. This is all the things that we get excited about. This has technology and physical environment. And then I was like, wow, this could work so well in this context. This here in India, where I was living, I was like, this could be the world leader. This country has all of the characteristics to make it an incredible place to produce biochar and to draw down carbon from ERW. It has the Deccan traps, it has the Raj Mahal traps, these amazing geological formations. It has heat, humidity, it has degraded, beaten up soils. It has people who are crying out for this remineralization of their lands. And it had shed-loaded biomass that was currently, and it had problems around that it needed to solve around biomass burning, around methane emissions. I was like, this is a great solution. How do I get in on this? And so that was my entry point, right? And then I decided I wanted to just invest my time and energy into it, and slowly migrated out of that business and looked at these other options across Africa and Latin America. And I was lucky enough to be picked up by Stripe. I invested quite a lot of time in building up this trade association, the Carbon Removal India Alliance, which is now doing some great work. And so, that was the genus. That was how it came to pass.
I like seeing more people experience crossing the methodology types. I think it's really interesting that there are several project developers who are doing both biochar and enhanced rock weathering, some of which are in India as well, under the same roof. And it's nice to see that you also have crossed over there. Historically, we've seen them segregated. Do you think we will see more people like you and people like Varaha who are doing sort of both at the same time? Is that a future pathway for project development?
Yeah, I think that this is, I'm speaking for myself here, I think this is this is a sensible move. I think you have, especially if you are working and have the trust of a farmer base and a geography, you have some solutions, different solutions there. I think the Holy Grail will be seeing how they operate together, and I know Elena Varas doing some amazing work in it, but how do we get the MRV to work? The agronomics probably do, but how do we get the MRV to work in that regard? But for me, yes, this is something that I think could work very nicely together. Maybe not in the same field at the same time, but could work in the same geography.
Maria Elena, she knows there's an open invitation as soon as the time is ripe to do so, but I've long been stumped by her research, and obviously it would be amazing if you could find ways to do these things at the same time, but I have no idea how you can untangle the two active variables here just at the superficial level of just biochar and enhanced rock weathering. Obviously there's a bunch of variables nested underneath each of those that how can you attribute causality within an open system like that and make the science good enough? There's like a lot of open scientific questions just on those two things separately, especially for enhanced rock weathering right now. So how could you possibly combine them and do good science? There is a Reversing Climate Change podcast episode that will come out on this topic because I cannot fully, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. Is it as I characterize it, or is it somehow easier to do good science work on that interaction between those two?
And I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to try and warrant any opinion on this at all. But what I would say is that if the agronomics are demonstrating there is some positive agronomic benefit there, and I think if we can lean on that, and then work out as the first, I'll really understand the agronomics. Is this an agronomic tool? Can we utilize both in certain conditions to raise productivity of the land and ensure that productivity can increase over the long term? Then I think there is a benefit there that is worth exploring. I have no idea how to untangle, putting ERW on the Brita filter of biochar. So I just don't know. I'm not going to even try. And I would be, there are some incredibly smart people out there, and I am not. I have no idea.
Okay, I won't force you to answer. I have no idea either. I also respect when people can just say, that's beyond the limit of my knowledge. Please ask someone else. I'm so sorry. A lesser person, Tom, might just ramble some BS and hope that it kind of hung together. So kudos to you.
But I can rabble on the agronomics, but definitely not on the drawdown component.
Yeah, fair enough. What did you learn through your Stripe Climate Fellowship? What was surprising to you? What was confirmed? What did you walk away with?
I went in with a hypothesis, and that hypothesis was that today there are a number of benefits from biochar and ERW in global south agricultural contexts that are not currently being valued and therefore not currently being monetized. And if we're able to monetize them, we will be able to spread the cost and therefore make this a more go down the cost curve faster That was the hypothesis. And I think about this a bit like if we're shining a torch at the wall, that beam of light, it's just sort of one sort of white dot. When we put it through a new lens, like a prism, you can see those stacks, those stacking of colors coming out, but we are still just resting a lot of the weight of the benefit on the carbon. So for me, one of the big findings was those benefits are highly dependent upon the context in which you apply it. So having gone in pretty gung-ho about, this will work in a majority of contexts, actually really getting to grips with the specifics of what will work where and what of those benefits will work where. Is it going to be, is that benefit going to be related to the water holding capacity of the soil, or is it going to be related to pesticide, or is it going to be related to fertilizer use efficiency? And those are all slightly different depending on the context. So that was one thing. This is more complicated than I thought was one. I think the other thing was around the awareness amongst key stakeholder groups. So the groups that I was targeting was those gatekeepers to international agricultural policy, and also those gatekeepers to financing adaptation, resilience, and rural development. And I was surprised at how limited the knowledge was in this area. That was something that surprised me quite a bit. But I was also, and then the third area was related to which commodities is this of most interest to. And we saw, during the course of the year, I saw that certain commodities certain commodity value chains have far more interest than others when it came to application. And the coffee industry was it's just a great place to be operating. It was solving a real problem, and there was a lot of energy and movement in that industry. And I think other industries, value chains, cacao, sugar, cotton will probably catch up. Rice will probably catch up as well. But there are some value chains that are further ahead than others. So I'd say those are sort of my three takeaways.
Wow. What is it about coffee supply chains that make them so amenable to applying certain types of minerals to their fields?
So, and I would say this more on the biochar side. I think there's just starting to be trials on ERW side. But first of all, there is regulation out of the EU, where, say, the EU deforestation regulation puts a lot of burden to ensure that those supply chains do not start to move up the hill as it gets hotter, and therefore they would be a breach of the EUDR regulation. So they're actively looking for solutions to allow amendments to allow that soil to be to allow that farming to occur at those low altitudes is one. The other is around, because that commodity doesn't get mixed. It's very clear there's a direct link between the farm and the consumer, and also the consumer is willing to pay a certain premium as well. So there is an interest from the large CPGs, the consumer processed goods companies, around achieving their net zero targets, and it's very clear that line between the two. And from that you can get methane we can get both a reduction as well as a removal. You can get a reduction in methane, which is a big problem, at both the farm level from the husk, at both the milling level. So, a lot of biogenic waste is going down, getting moved out into the with water. There's big methane challenges, and also potential to reduce fertilizer as well. And there is starting to be a cachet around biochar and coffee. There's a brand in Colombia that has a biochar coffee, which is quite cool.
Where can I buy this, by the way? I want to support it. Is it on the bag
Caravale
too?
sells it. It's on the bag. I think Caravale maybe they sell it.
Coffee. Obviously, there's versions of it that are not a luxury product, but especially for single origin coffee, that is a prestigious product. So it makes sense that they would have enough margin that they could invest in something like this and put it on the bag, and their consumers are highly engaged. This is not just like put it in a little pod, get the caffeine into me, get the brown juice working as fast as possible in my system or whatever. And I imagine there's probably similar dynamics with the luxury goods phenomenon that we're seeing in carbon removal broadly on the buyer level. The people who buy it are there because it's like a little bit of a showy thing. It's way more expensive than what they technically need to do in many of these cases. And you're also able to see things like, I think some of the best and most beautiful branding and visual assets that come out of carbon removal are from alt carbon. I really love seeing the Darjeeling fields. I get transported just looking at them. I'm always just like, well done. I stopped to look at this. I don't always do that for a lot of things. But that's also a thing that I imagine has a strong potential single origin dynamic into. I drink a lot less tea in that way, so you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. But I suspect there's also a little bit of that prestige feeling to it. And so will luxury goods or more prestigious products continue to lead some of these innovations?
So I think that's one avenue, right? So that's the coffee avenue. But also, I think that when we look at more, and this, come back to the RW perspective, I think we're starting to see these kernels of really interesting outcomes around biofortification around nutrition, around a better quality of product that's coming out, right? Okay. So, and I think that is a driver as well. And I also think yield is a driver. So we talked a bit around on the coffee side, around EUDR, around climate smart ag, whereas in these other commodities, say rice, this is yield. You are providing a soil input into degraded land. You're also remineralizing those soils, so you are getting those. We're starting to see this really interesting biofortification within that food source as well. So when we're not talking about food security, we're not just talking about volume. We're talking about the quality and that nutritional density of that food type as well. And I think that will and could drive demand. One of the other things that I should have mentioned with the Struck Climate Fellowship is that a big driver of maybe this is more of an insetting conversation, but a big driver of was around productivity. That's where this starts to make sense. That's around if you can gain that productivity from an economic perspective. These interventions, which sounds quite simple and quite obvious, but that's where on the models this really starts to make a lot of sense.
For nutrient density, this is one of those things that I've been hearing about for a long time, and it's one of those things that, as far as I can tell, has not really mainstreamed even into the big organic-ish grocery stores. That nutrient density is not something that we're measuring, at least not in a very wide way. I'm wondering if technology is going to unlock that. Is it just another thing that consumers need to be educated on? Because from what I can tell, a carrot now versus a carrot in Nantes or a carrot 50 years ago, it's almost like a different thing entirely. You might not even know what you're missing. Is there a way that we're going to mainstream that? Is that coming?
Yeah, and I wonder if this is not going to be driven by the luxury sector. I wonder if it's going to be driven at the opposite end when we're talking about places that need nutrition and are lacking in nutrition. So that whereas the margin on this, it could be in producing those foodstuffs in these areas where there is a nutritional challenge.
Is it like when there's riboflavin is added because there's like a B mineral deficiency or something like that?
Or where, so say the
Niacin.
Food Agricultural Organization, there are places of the world where there is a nutritional deficit, or there is an interest in, there is a food security challenge. How do we get the most nutrient dense food? That the equation starts to add up, I think, in those areas. We're also seeing investment starting to go down in ingredients that have a greater nutritional density as well. So these, there are equity investments in those entities. So I think there'll be two poles, one coming up from these areas which require more nutrient density because of their population requires it, and also potentially from this higher, more luxury market as well, and they'll probably converge somewhere in the middle.
The luxury story is so obvious to me. What is the name of the grocery store in Los Angeles that is
Whole Foods?
Better than Whole Foods, but it's way more expensive, and it's almost become okay, Jamie, look this up. Fancy grocery store, Los Angeles, organic. I'm gonna say it, and you're gonna know it. Oh, Erewhon. Do you know Erewhon? Erewhon is like the new Whole Foods, like post Amazon
Okay.
Whole Foods, and like it's very notoriously expensive. It's like if you shop there, it's very much a conspicuous consumption status
Yeah.
kind of symbol. And so like the story for nutrient density there is so obvious to me. The kind of person that's going to go there, they if there was a chart that they could understand for nutrient density, they would opt for the nutrient dense food. But for the low end, the commodity end of this, unless people are trying to avoid something like pellagra and they're just like going to become physically ill, I think the name of the game is cheap calories, is it not? Or are there places where that is actually changing through government or through private industry where that is not true? I just don't know enough.
Yeah. Well, so there are, in some countries around the world, there are national programs
Oh, okay.
around nutritional density. So and that is where, when I talk about, a lot of my work now is around engaging with these multilateral agencies that can unlock either policy or unlock, so agricultural policy, or unlock capital. There are these programs within certain countries that are being supported, and I think that is an area, that is a lever that we can pull on, that I get quite excited about. Alongside, if we can unlock and demonstrate fertilizer use efficiency increases, I think that for me is another sort of holy grail area as well.
So many people in carbon dioxide removal and maybe carbon markets in general look to offsetting, which people know very well. You have a credit that is originated through some sort of activity that is sold to a third party to account for their emissions in some way, or ideally to account for it in some way. And then insetting is one of those terms that I've frankly seen it abused as a term. It's like not even clear what it means sometimes, and people will use it in ways where it's like, we created a thing that was sold to another company in the same industry. I'm like, okay, that's offsetting though, right? But it's thematic offsetting or like intra-industry offsetting, but people call it insetting. And that's just like one example. Maybe canonically, Tom, explain what insetting is once and for all, indisputably, inarguably, so we can move on and we can just call the taxonomy exactly what it is. What actually is an inset?
So, Ross, that's an incredibly difficult question to
I
ask.
know it is. That's why you have to do the answers and I just have to do the questions. That's the best job of all.
Because it hasn't been fully defined, but I'll do my best. All right. So an activity that removes, so for us, working carbon dioxide removal, an activity that removes carbon dioxide within the supply shed, right? And so the definition of supply shed bears a lot of weight in that statement. What a supply shed could be. So there are different. It's a really interesting area whereby the norms are being set by the industry and also by people just doing it, right? So some companies are willing to say, well, this is my supply shed. Some companies will say my supply shed is the physical farm that my produce comes from. Another group will say my supply shed it could be the farm 5 farms away. I'll apply biochar, and I don't really know, but within those 10 farms, within that area, then I've applied it within the region, within the sort of small, close supply region, because I have a trader who has a trader who has a trader, and I know within that it's going to come from this area, but I don't know exact farm, and that farm will change on the day, right? And then it will get blended, and then it will get blended again, and then it'll end up as being part of this mass balance. So the definition of supply shed is very difficult. It's definitely not a different country. I would argue it should be the same region, and it should be the same sub-region. But how you define supply shed is currently still being worked out.
Does an inset require that the carbon negativity that's produced to be consumed by the host organization? An example of which might be sugarcane manufacturer. They have an enormous pile of bagasse sitting on their land, and one of the many biochar project developers camps out there and starts pyrolyzing all of that bagasse, and then that sugarcane manufacturer is counting the negative emissions from the biochar against the emissions that they produce in making and transporting sugarcane. Is that an inset?
It depends how they use. If they're then adjusting the emissions factor of their product, that would be a product claim. If it's then to work through, if they're then working with, say, Tate and Lyle or British Associated Sugars or another company that can then claim it against their scope 3, then that would also be an inset. It sort of works its way through the value chain. But I think the point here is it's not sold outside the value chain, and there is a direct link to the production, to reducing or removing within that direct value chain. How you define the end of it. But yes, I would define reducing down the emissions from the gas decomposing is an inset if it's not sold and it's utilized by within that value chain.
Mm-hmm.
However,
yes. Oh, come on, Tom.
However,
Come on.
there is the way that the carbon accountancy works today is it makes it incredibly complicated from a durable removals perspective. So we have the GHG protocol and the land sector removal guidance, which makes accounting for both biochar and ERW within value chains from a scope 3 perspective difficult, because it has to sit on a separate ledger to your scope 3. What you could do in the bagasse example, that's a reduction, so that would reduce. That'd be quite easy. That sits on your scope 3. But then if you were the biochar, the removal from the biochar would sit separately. So there's not an obvious use case today for that activity, and that is a real problem. There is, however, from a product perspective, there is a use case in terms of if we can get the attributes of biochar and the RW somehow included in a product footprint and have that registered in Cool Farms tool or another tool or the other tools, then that could have a driver of this activity. We also see some really interesting work being done in Europe on net zero oat bars, where biochar's spread onto the oat fields. That works through with a really innovative substrate company, and I believe Carbon Future's working on that, and they're able to claim a net zero oat bar, which has a premium to it. But I think that the corporate claims are currently difficult from a reductions perspective. I think where I think insetting could really work is where you start to monetize the other benefits of that activity. So say in rice, there's big challenges around pesticide residue management. So rice coming to the UK is very often rejected because it has a pesticide residue. Obviously that has a financial cost attached to it. Yeah. So if you are using the RW to reduce down your pesticide requirement, that has a large that could have a substantial benefit in terms of less product being lost at the borders. And there'll be these other use cases as well within these value chains where you can start to inset and you can start to stack multiple benefits on top of each other, and you have inset all of those benefits into that value chain, and maybe you spread the cost over a number of these different benefits. I also think about insetting from on sort of a municipal or a payment for ecosystem services level as well. Could we say within the UK has the Wye Valley as this beautiful river, the Wye, between England and Wales, which has really large challenges around eutrophication, nitrate runoff from chicken farms. Big problem in the UK. Can we utilise biochar within that chicken value chain, that poultry value chain, but as a way to reduce down that nitrate leaching? So effectively charge the biochar and use it elsewhere. Use it as a decontaminant. And there are these other sort of use cases that we could use within certain value chains that aren't directly related to the carbon removal benefit that I think would start to make sense over time.
My intuition here is that you study this carbon accountancy issue, that carbon removals aren't snugly fit into the scopes, and at least for value change as you describe, and then are looking for other ways in. Just like, how do we just not fuss around with this and just sort of find the open window and climb in a different way? Is that kind of how your brain worked on this?
Yeah, and well, I think and we talked a bit. There's last time, if we think about that prism, there are these different potential attributes that we can monetize. And for me, it's about finding who values them, who's going to pay for it. It's not, and it may be separate from the carbon. And can we stack them on top of each other? Is it an adaptation benefit when we're talking about coffee moving up the hill? Is that resilience benefit that the thing that's going to monetize this? And then can we sell the reductions, or can we internalize the reductions? And then can we do something? Can we sell off the removal? It's these innovative business models that I think I really want to try and understand more and start to unlock.
You could also go in through the front door with a nice suit on and work with the greenhouse gas protocol people and try and get them to recharacterize removals. But
and Ross, I'm with you entirely on that, right? I think there is, in terms of these high leverage points for policy change, this is one of them. This, and also having these practices included in the emission factors tools that corporates use.
My guess on this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it might be parallel to what we've seen with SBTI, trying to figure out how to make sense of carbon removals, where I've said this on many shows, that no matter what they do, someone is going to be very, very angry with them. And the politics of how to characterize new assets and fit them into old paradigms that people have built businesses around is very, very touchy. Does a similar thing take place right now if you were trying to change the carbon accountancy rules for carbon removal within the greenhouse gas protocol?
So the honest answer is I haven't got in depth into the next iteration of the greenhouse gas protocol, and I think it's worth engaging in some advocacy around it. I don't know the process well enough in terms of, but I think it's worth us as a group. I also think it is a lower hanging fruit could be around emissions factors.
Is that managed in the same process, or is that external to? It is
external.
Which
there'll be a number of
touch
providers.
That? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So Cool Farms tool. There are a number of different providers, and also companies themselves will determine based on academic research what that emissions factor could be as well.
Oh, so it's not like WRI manages this thing. It's pretty fragmented still.
There is some. It's fragmented, but there are also some sources of truth that could be good points to engage in as well.
Okay. One of the bigger insetting issues of carbon removal that I've stared at for a long time is that, for whatever reason, I don't know if this is still true, but it used to be true when I was looking at it much more closely, that Scope 3 reductions are less valuable and are less checked than other types of carbon assets. Whereas using an offset for your Scope 1 emissions, like those are the things that you're more likely to get dinged on than some like pay for practices Scope 3 change in agribusiness. I don't know if that is true. You're thinking. That's part one. Tell me.
So I think there is there's a priority here, right? So what can you change first of all? What can you ultimately change? Where is the low hanging fruit? Where are the things we can do immediately? And then you're working your way down into the Scope 3 area. For food and beverage, the vast majority of those emissions are obviously going to be Scope 3. And therefore, and also you have a challenge around, you will share that supply chain with a number of your competitors as well. So you have to get over the free rider challenge that is inherent in these industries. So you are looking at so there is a complication here. And also those supply chains are fragmented. You could have quite small, ultimately, end supply chains that you're working with. So there is a complication there. However, I think that there will be a level of optimization for Scope 1 and Scope 2. And then where a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been achieved. And then I think there will be a focus on Scope 3. And there is at the moment. There is in terms of, there is an interest in having lower emission products going up through your supply chain.
Is the value from that high enough to justify the price of producing biochar or enhanced rock weathering? I feel like some of the stuff is still single-digit integers worth for Scope 3 insets.
I think it depends on the commodity type, and we may start to see this in some commodities and what other problems you're solving. I think if you're trying to look at stacking the whole benefit onto all of those different benefits we've talked about onto just the carbon cost, then I think it will be a stretch. But if you're able to come up with an innovative way to pass out a number of those, to monetize a number of those benefits, then I think then it starts to make sense. And as I said before, on the insetting front, if there is a yield uplift, that drives a lot of this. That drives the economics.
Why didn't you solve everything for me today, Tom?
Do you know what, Ross? I wish I. Why don't we have this conversation in 2035 and see where we are?
Oh, cool. When SPTI takes effect. Okay, cool. Have fun for us.
There is one thing I think that is interesting that may be worth talking about, and that's this thing around decentralized or distributed versus centralized sort of versus centralized on the RW. I think there's a misconception here around. So the reason one of the things I was really interested by working for Marty was that they're looking at the RW landscape. One of the key risks that we have now is around delivery risk, and I think if you are working with a number of very large farmers, you have quite large counterparty risk. Whereas if you're working with a whole host of farmers who are small, your counterparty risk is vastly reduced, because you can have, even though it's incredibly complicated, you can have a number of those farmers drop out, and it doesn't matter. Also, there's a real use need for in these environments. So I think that's something, anyway, I don't know if you want to talk about, that's something that's vague. That's something that I think about quite a lot in this as the sector develops.
I think we just need to have you back on another time, Tom. I don't think we really, I don't think we finished it. I think there's going to be more here.
Let's do it.
Thanks for being here. I'm glad we finally made it happen. Thanks for keeping me on my toes.
Hey, Ross. I enjoy these things a lot, so thanks so much for getting me on.